that's one sort of one way. Whoops.
No,
That's
I
sort of
just
one.
started to record.
Oh, great. Thank you. Don't hold all this against me, though.
We won't.
So on the one side, you have the people who are the environment is everything, and it's in its extreme form. It's almost anti-humanistic in some of the rhetoric. Most environmental organizations that I've worked with, both in South America and in the U.S., they have an end goal that they want to reach, and that's what they're aiming at. Conservation is a broader term that goes from restoration in the most active form to management to protection on the other range of the spectrum. And for me, the definition allows for use of all those different tools to maximize biodiversity and engage people. So there are people who during the condor controversy, that shall the California condor be taken into captivity and bred in captivity and then released back in the wild, or shall it just die with dignity? That was those were the two camps, even in the ornithological community. And I couldn't stand the idea of seeing the California condor go extinct just because the alternative was to breed it in captivity and reintroduce it. It had been already done with Andean condors. I was part of that project in its beginning, and so there's some purists out there, and then you have the use of the term conservation. My wife's family are cattle ranchers from the desert Southwest, and very active in management of water resources and staying out of riparian areas. And they're part of a consortium, a land trust that sees the greater good of having both wildlife and nature flourish, as well as the productivity of cattle. And so anyway, I guess one is more in tune with how do you make things better, and one is more in tune with how do you keep bad things from happening. Maybe that's the best way to put it. But I'll get back to that in a second. So in South America, we went from research projects that were expanding national parks and things using indicator species like the ones I was working on, not the Watson, but the others, and the oil birds. And we were also working with young professionals to train them and then get them into grad schools in the States and elsewhere, because there's only one master's program up in Costa Rica in wildlife management. So, and we started a new wildlife management program in Venezuela as well. So then it's interesting. So I have vitiligo, and I'm about as fluorescent as any human on the planet. And so here I am working in South America, and being the poster child for a gringo. It's interesting getting over those barriers, because you're according to a lot of my students, the United States was using the national debt of Venezuela as blackmail to use their natural resources. Well, the United States didn't hold a lot of Venezuelan debt to begin with, and then I'm not a Yankee imperialist. We had to prove that every time we did these courses. So at some point, I moved back to the U.S. and I was working with Wildlife Conservation Society. I became their first director of Latin American programs, and had a much too broad a swath of things to do, with pretty much no help except the young professionals who we brought back and were our country directors around the region. So that gets us to about 1992. And so in 1992, I was traveling like 118, no, more than that, 218 nights a year in South America. And I had two little kids, little half Venezuelan blonde kids. Anyway, Melissa, at some point, it became extremely wearing on me and the family. And strangely enough, our family farm, my mother's side of the family were all Quakers. And so my monthly dose of Quakerism was from Grandpa, who would let me know about about a more simple life and about humility and fairness to all concerned and hard work. And not that he didn't have much of he had plenty ego, but anyway, it was the humility part was, I think, what his teachings were rather than what his own self was. But anyway, a great guy. And that whole family, his wife came from the Atwater family, and they were very active in philanthropy and also very active in women's suffrage and other things. And so my mom was a I guess she was a character. She had defied her parents and ended up in med school, and was in the first wave of post-Freudian psychiatrists, and became one of my closest friends ever. And she had developed dementia back in '92. So we moved down to the Eastern Shore, where my mother and uncle, speaking of philanthropy and humility, were donating our 410-acre waterfront farm to Audubon, a chapter, to make an Audubon education center. And my uncle had just died. My mom was getting dementia, so we just moved the whole family, sold two houses, moved the whole family down there, and spent 3.5 years, almost 4, making that dream a reality. And it's still going. It's the most trusted source of environmental knowledge on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and teaches tens of thousands of kids a year, and is engaged directly with the school system and the STEM curricula and performance-based things. It was my most interesting job ever, because the Eastern Shore, as many of you know, was on the wrong side of the Revolutionary War and the wrong side of the Civil War. Very much a plantation economy at the time of those two conflicts. And I was a fluorescent Yankee. But they had my uncle, who was a Yankee, and my grandmother, who was a Yankee, and my grandfather, who was a Yankee, and they had done a lot for the community, so they figured I might too. So they let me stay. But I learned more there about communities that have sharp divides. And at that time, especially, the sharp divide between the communities of color and the rest of Talbot County. And so we started these programs that were meant to rescue the lower third of the 6th grade, because the 6th grade is when kids either fall through the cracks or don't. It's when they start. And so we got a grant from Apple, and the grant gave us enough money for a person who would teach these kids and mentor them and all sorts of things. And then we would have field trips to just about every cultural institution in the area, and they learned all sorts of things. And if they stayed for the first year and got good grades, they got a little Apple laptop. This was about 50-50 African-American and white kids from a very low end of the socioeconomic spectrum. A very different view of how to work on issues, despite the difficulties in the public schools. And all of our curriculum was about the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And the other part to my early upbringing was going down to visit Grandpa and Uncle George and their spouses in Easton, and going out on their boats to just to do a cruise on a sailboat, and hearing all these incredible cacophony of ducks in the early morning as you're going out of the bay. And by the time I got back there in '92, a lot of those populations had been severely diminished, and so we had curricula on the old shore and the new shore and that sort of thing. But that was also that was sort of a labor of love, of my family. It was that farm was the largest asset in our family by at least 2 orders of magnitude, I think. And so it's still going on. I'm still on the board, and I'm still required to be one of the major donors. So it's something I'll be sticking with. But it gave me also an opportunity to get back into Audubon. When I was a kid, as bird watcher, I've always been a bird watcher. The Audubon was the first organization that I gave a donation to. My parents took us down to this little bank called the Chase Manhattan Bank in Pelham Manor, and gave us $1,200 each, my brother and me. That was all the money they spent on clothes, food, books, etc., transportation, entertainment, everything. And we had to have 10% left at the end of the year for charity, and that my 10% gift was to Audubon. So I had been a kitchen boy in the Audubon Camp of Maine, my first paid job in conservation, and I'd done a lot of work in Christmas bird counts and that sort of thing. So it was really good to get back to just hands-on and being not a bureaucrat, but really working within a community and crossing those divides, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic divides. And I'd done a lot of that in South America, obviously, because there's the communist university everywhere, and there's the non-communist university in all those countries, and you work with everybody. And so from there, Audubon was looking for the head. They had an Everglades restoration office in Miami, and they were looking for a new head of it. And I got recruited, and that part of the, I think in a lot of ways, I was at my most effective there because I knew science, and we got a lot of scientists involved. I knew about education, and we got a lot of money from Carrie Meek, who was in control of the appropriations from EPA to do inner city education. But on that front, it was like the most, I guess you'd say the most complicated issues, but you could boil it down to just water, because that was the currency for both sustainability of humans in South Florida and sustainability of the ecosystem, because the ecosystem was the water supply. And we ended up, after about 5 years, passing the Everglades Restoration Bill 85-1 in the Senate and 312-2 in the House. And it was a clean bill with no pork in it, which annoyed Trent Lott and Denny Hastert to no end. But it was a remarkable accomplishment, not just me, but that was trying to get everybody from the sugar industry to the inner city communities to the water divisions for drinking water of all the different municipalities. So it was an interesting but tough job. So not that this should be more about me, because the next step was coming up here. And at that point, I kind of had figured out that in the Everglades, you had to get people turned out to understand what the Everglades were and what it meant to them. And when I was 10 years old, the first time I went to the Everglades with my dad, mom, visiting my other grandmother on the western shore of Florida, the population of wading birds in the Everglades had fallen by 90% between 65 and 96. So, there's a lot of indicators there, and people didn't value the power of tourism. And it turns out that the value of the tourism, fishing and bird watching, especially to South Florida, was higher than the value of the convention center on Miami Beach, which we got the chambers of commerce all excited about that, and brought together a bipartisan group around that. But that was an interesting time. So just to cut things to the chase a little bit. I've worked with indigenous populations in the middle of nowhere in South America. I've worked with kids and families on a racially divided eastern shore of Maryland with business and environmental groups in the Everglades, and all the science that I did just got me a foot in the door to get all that stuff done. But it wasn't really about me. It was about building constituencies in each area. And the power of that was that in South America, I could bring PhD scientists back to work in conservation and fund them through their graduate degrees through a number of different ways, but also fund their reentry and their becoming project managers for my institution. Down in Southern Florida, the work we did in the inner cities of Miami-Dade with failing schools. I was just looking up because, I'm retiring allegedly. I was just looking up all the people who were in my office, and every one of them, with the exception of one, has gone on to have even more illustrious careers than they had before. And, they are influencers in conservation and environmental issues. The same is true in the eastern shore of Maryland and down in South America. And a kid who was 17 years old, my predecessor was the chair of what's called the Species Survival Commission within the World Conservation Union. And he was 2 terms as the chair. When he was elected, about the time he was elected, I had lunch with this 17-year-old guy and a bunch of his friends in my house above the Universidad Simón Bolívar. And the 17-year-old who was there is now the head of the Species Survival Commission, following in the footsteps of George Rabb, which is pretty remarkable. Did his master's and PhD in the States and is working out of Venezuela. So it's building these careers and having those people understand that part of their job is to build other people's careers in conservation that I think is the most important. Because, the most green voting bloc in the federal government and frankly in almost every other state is a congressional Black caucus. And it's not because of birds, bugs, and bunnies. It's because of the environmental justice issues around what's happened in inner cities where they built heavy industrial places, right, where there's cheap labor, but then not all those heavy industrial ramifications get cleaned up afterwards. And so the issue of diversity and the issue of inclusion and relevance and all of that has been pounded into my head over the course of the last 30 years. And I think that's where it's funny because we're coming full circle around to those issues now in Chicago and elsewhere. And there are real opportunities to make a difference. And we're doing a lot of that. We have a thing called Zoo for All, which means the kids of all abilities, learning differences, developmental disabilities. Every one of our programs has a pathway for kids like that to engage and be successful in things. We also have programs in inner city communities and with faith-based groups and some others that are they're just fabulous. They're great partnerships. One of the faith-based groups built a community center, and we have an office there so we can work directly with them. And that's in Englewood. And then in back of the yards, there's another group. And in the western suburbs, the western part of the city, up in the Austin area, there's we work with, again, the West Side Ministers Association and others. And we have now what used to be a little small group that we had when I got there, about 20 kids, high school kids from the western suburbs, largely Anglo non-Hispanic, is now a group of 320 kids, 2/3 of which come from these unresourced communities of color, and all of them are going to college, every single one. And it's remarkable that this is not, it's not a huge investment. It's being able to, cross the line and say, I'm here to help, or we're here to help. We have these opportunities. Come and get them, and we teach kids how to develop everything from a application to come into these programs, as well as we help them when they're placing themselves in college. And so to me, conservation, it affects everybody. The natural resources and their use and abuse affects everybody in every place that I've ever been. And some of the places have been really horrific. And so when I say environmentalist versus conservationist, finding solutions and celebrating successes, like the restoration of the condor and the black-footed ferret and the osprey and the bald eagle and I just talking birds, sorry. All of those things.
How about the panda?
Don't forget the panda, yes. And
the pangolin.
And the pangolins, of course, the pangolins. Let's not forget them. So,
but they're not safe yet.
No, they're not safe. So, when I was down in Venezuela, I talked to a fellow who was a historian, and he said that on his deathbed, somebody asked Simon Bolivar, the great liberator of Northern South America, how did he feel about his life and all that he'd accomplished? And, Colombia had bounced back to being Colombia by itself, and Venezuela, and they were having wars and everything else. And Simon Bolivar said, I feel like I have been plowing the sea. And it's difficult with a growing population of humans and livestock. I sent out a little thing that shows, there's a graphic that shows that
you all got an email that I forwarded, so
yeah,
when we have a chance. Stuart, sitting at many of the meetings, there was a point where we were talking about creating conservation leaders.
Yeah.
It's part of strategic planning. And what I realized is my daughters and their husbands couldn't have been more exposed if I'd left them out in a tent somewhere.
Yeah.
They're simpatico, but I don't see them doing anything. Their children are very much interested and will be doing something. So how do you not only expose children, but engage them and kind of get them working in these areas? I mean, if I couldn't get my two daughters to go anything more than a worm, you know, how do you do it? How are you successful?
Well, you're talking to a guy whose first love was mud puddles, so so I just have to start with that. But one of the things is we try to my predecessor George Rabb came up with a concept and created the field of conservation psychology, and that is basically how do you go from caring about something, because everybody says, oh yeah, I care about elephants, to caring for them, taking the next step and saying, okay, I'm going to support elephant restoration of elephant populations or something. And whether that's philanthropically or with the way they approach other people and get them engaged. There's the issue that we have now with global warming. I was taught global warming by John Holdren, who was that was back in '77, and he ended up being President Obama's climate czar. Well, the models he had in 1977 were not even close to accurate. Actually, the warming is much worse than was predicted back there, and may get worse with all the methane coming out of the lakes and permafrost up north. Now, of course, that's all negative, right? That's, oh no, it's coming to an end. What can I do to stop global warming? Well, it's not just that. There's so many different ways to get involved, and to just understand what's going on is important. So we start with the early childhood kids, like the preschool kids. And if you have preschool kids or preschool grandkids and you go to the Hamill Family Play Zoo, there's going to be people there who will engage you in nature play with your kids or grandkids. And it's a bonding experience between the whole family and this facilitator, but also it's a learning experience. And we have moms who meet there with their stroller mom club or whatever it is, and they just have a great time for a half a day, and then they go home, and then they come back a couple of days later and have a great time, and it's free to members. So getting people involved, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding how we can get the family involved at those early ages. And our STEM education staff, it's not a heavy dose of STEM education. You just assimilate it. And there was a study done not too long ago about, and published in a peer-reviewed journal, that said that the majority of, it might be the super majority, but the majority of an adult STEM education happens in post-secondary schools when they're going with their kids to science museums and zoos and aquaria. Those were the three most prevalent learning centers for STEM education for adults, and in addition to little kids. And it can be fun, if you make learning fun. I don't remember a bit of trigonometry. I hated that class. But when I got into geometry, I had a great teacher who made it all fun, and I was like, oh boy, this is terrific. And I think that's true of all kids and all families. You don't want to go to a place and have it be drudgery. You want to have fun. You want to learn something. And with millennials, who are the largest generation in our history now, and they are mobile, they're online, they're peer driven. 83% sleep with their phones. And I guess if they're married, their husband or wife don't get jealous of that. 50% of the workforce is made up of millennials. 3/4 of them have profiles on social networking. List goes on. Very diverse and emotionally and cause driven. So and I think the attention span is a little bit shorter than some people, and I'm wearing on yours, I know. But this is a group that can be the leaders in conservation in the future. You've got 50% of them who are either indifferent to zoos or in favor, and then 25% are anti-zoo, etc. I think the biggest problem we have overall is apathy. We get bombarded by so much stuff and just information, and we don't, and people can make up an opinion on very few facts now. They're just getting them from other places. So I think the way to get people more engaged is to really, I think zoos are fundamental for this, for conservation of wildlife, because I saw my first endangered species and engaged at the Bronx Zoo. I know there's like 3 or 4 other people who I work with closely at National Audubon who had the same experience. But we have very different opinions between the urban and rural America, the so-called red states, where in Montana, where we have a cabin, they call Bozeman Bos Angeles now for all the Californians that are moving in, and Missoula is a hotbed of blue. Somehow, though, I think there's ways that within Montana, which is rural, hunters can get along with conservationists who can get along with ranchers and things. That's not as influenced by just sort of information flow.
Stuart, your visual is off. I don't know what happened.
Oh, hang on.
There you go.
I'm back again.
Yep.
Okay, so I should just sort of shut up and let people ask me questions or talk about things.
There's a marvelous book out there about wilderness deficit disorder.
Yeah.
Is that the right title?
Well, I don't know what about that book, but I know that I spent a lot of time in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is right next to our cabin. My wife had to get me a little spray bottle of spruce scent and a couple of other little things so that I could feel when I was in Miami about, this is what the Bob smells like and that sort of thing. Well, there is. I mean, in our brains haven't evolved since we were hunter-gatherer groups, eating all the wildlife on the Great Plains. We really haven't. Our brains are still running on the same, shelter, wildlife, and foraging and this and that that we were back then, and we just have a lot more clutter in there. So yes, there is something that when you get to a place where you can see vast areas of landscape and wildlife, there is a healing component to that, because we evolved with that, and now and the same thing is true with dogs. I mean, we brought dogs to, and just about every migratory group brought dogs to places where there weren't dogs. And dingoes and Carolina dogs in this country are very similar to the ones that came over the Pleistocene land bridge. So animals have an impact on people. Animals, especially social animals like dogs, will help people produce endorphins, which is why the things that we've done with Advocate Healthcare studying kids on the autism spectrum, it's just take out an animal and work with the kid and the animal, and the kid all of a sudden is focused, he's making eye contact, he's learning, and the parents are all crying in the corner, you know. It's remarkable the impact that animals have on people.
Merle?
Merle, you're
I can hear
muted.
you.
You're muted.
Sorry. This is a question in the context of travel and also in the context of COVID safety. And, oh, I lost Stuart. He's not on my screen.
Where is Stuart? Where in the world?
He's gone.
He's somehow gone.
He'll be back.
He'll come back.
He should.
He probably doesn't even know he's gone.
Here he is.
Oh, okay.
Welcome back.
Hi.
We
You-
can't hear you.
He's connecting. It isn't connected yet.
Okay.
Hi,
Stuart, you're there? Okay.
I am. I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Good.
My question is a question that's concerned with travel in the COVID era and with the consideration of weather. For the reasons we were just talking about feeling a nature deficit, if a
Mhm.
person wants to have next winter an out from Chicago and to be in the wide open spaces somewhere in South America, is there any particular opportunity that comes to mind?
Well, the list does not start with Venezuela.
I know that.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a number of places that are really lovely. Patagonia is incredible. And, you know, going south along the coast, there are all these populations and breeding grounds of penguins and cormorants and things. There's the beach where the orcas come up and catch the little baby sea lions and elephant seals. There's also just this huge wide open space and filled with maras, which are little kind of rabbit-like creatures, rodents really, and all sorts of other things, guanacos, etc. And you can go right up into the Andes as well, because there are high mountain salars, salt lakes, where flamingos breed. The other side of that, you know, the Andean range is Chile, which is got everything. I mean, it has scenery that's out of this world, just unbelievably lush places, podocarpus forests, great seafood, terrific seafood, and very friendly people. It's very European, more the Irish German influence over there, but Irish. Their War of Independence hero was Bernardo O'Higgins, which I thought was pretty interesting, right? So, and those are the two places where you can see some terrific vistas and mountains and that sort of thing. Going back up the coast, you know, Peru is pretty remarkable, and you know, going up to Machu Picchu and the new area that they've discovered up there that I haven't been to is really nice. Colombia is, you know, north coastal Colombia is really beautiful as well. But you know, if I were going to choose something and you wanted to go to a place that's fun and outdoors and and also has great vistas and good food and wine. Then the Southern Cone is a pretty easy one to do. Keep in mind that Argentina and Peru don't like each other much. So ditto Bolivia and Peru. Argentina and Chile don't like each other very much. And same is true as Peru and Bolivia, because Bolivia used to extend down to the sea before they annoyed the Chileans, and the Chileans, won a war that ended up with them running Peru from Lima, and with a lot more of the minerals than the other countries had.
Stuart, is the zoo running any trips?
I am not sure, Barbara. At one point, we were thinking about doing a Patagonia trip last year, and that obviously fell through. And we may try one next year. But I'll have to, I know that there is allegedly another director that will start at some point, and and it really some of that will be up to them as well, obviously. So I went out to the Falkland Islands with Bill Conway, my friend from WCS, about 5 years ago, and there's an island called North Jason, or South Jason, sorry, that they own, that is the largest breeding ground of black-browed albatross and gentoo and rockhopper penguins in that hemisphere.
I'll let everybody know if there's a trip that comes up.
Thank you. Thank you.
So one of the things that I sent out to everybody is a graphic. And on the graphic, it shows, I think it gives the answer to animals should be in the wild and not in captivity. Because this was a study done about 10 years ago now, so it's an underestimate. But of all the Earth's land mammal biomass, about 32% are humans and about 63% are livestock, and the rest is wildlife. So 5% of the world's biomass of land mammals is wildlife. And that study has been looked at. I don't think anybody's redone the numbers, but it's really alarming that we could lose giraffes in the next 20 years from the continent of Africa, because they're getting eaten. Lions, because they're getting poisoned. They also have feline AIDS. They also have distemper. There's a lot of problems out there, but I would just say that what we do, we have 3 centers of excellence. One is about animal care and welfare, and we've had 3 international symposia over the last 10 years, and we're doing a lot more now. We've Center for Conservation Leadership, engaging people, and this community engagement and social innovation that I talked a little bit about too. But that is an alarming bunch of dots. The first one I saw was just a big pie chart. There's a little sliver, but this one talks about, how many sheep versus, if you look at cattle, it's a huge amount of cattle, and everywhere that there is wildlife, most everywhere they're in competition with people and livestock, which is a difficult scenario. I also put down some things like Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a great book by Jared Diamond if you're interested in the evolution of the human immune system, as well as how we, how some populations in some areas grew more technology quicker than others.
Shama?
Stuart, I loved your story. I think the people would love to hear. Remember, you told me when you were in South America, it happened to question many of the other conservation leaders used to go and talk to the men, and then you really found out the ones they needed to talk to their wives, because they're the ones who were in
Exactly
power.
right.
It's those anthropological things people don't recognize. Because
Yeah,
you have stories like that.
Yeah, we worked with the Yaquana Indians in southern Venezuela, and I didn't know enough about their culture, but obviously, we would go and first visit with in the downriver population, and we developed a really great program with them. But I'd say, can we leave at like tomorrow to get downriver? Could we leave at 8 o'clock? Well, we'll talk about that in the morning. And then they'd go off. In the morning they come back, said, yes, we can leave earlier this morning. But then we had a big agreement between ourselves and the elders, the Yaquana tribe, that were up in the next watershed. So we had to fly up there. And we had this long discussion. It was very productive. We were telling them what we could do for them, and how all we needed is permission to move ahead as a joint venture. And they said, okay, well, come back at breakfast and we'll have a decision for you. Because they all had to go on and talk with their wives, because it was a matriarchal society. And so it was like, oh, okay, we got it. So anyway, it was kind of, there is a lot of strange things like that that I should have known better, but yeah, that was a fun one. And the reason why we were in the southern area where there was one family that moved out to the mouth of the river, was because the mother of these two women had passed, and the chief, who called himself the Capitan, was only Capitan because he was married to that woman. And so we were talking to the wrong person for a little while, but anyway, so the one woman moved her family all the way down the watershed, and the other stayed in the upper part of the watershed, and everything was peachy after that.
Mara?
No, I just wanted to know if Stuart went direct to the women after that.
Well, it's a little, the guys still are guys, and so you play the game as best you can. And they were, it was if there's one place I could go in the world right now, and I can't go there, it'd be to that group in Venezuela and southern Venezuela, and talk to the guys in Yaquana. They have, since we were there, they have sent their kids to college. They have at least one member of Congress, and they're doing really well, except for gold mining, which is happening upriver on the Caura River, the main river that flows out of southern Venezuela. Incidentally, I was doing these studies of these endangered chicken and turkey-like birds, and they're eaten everywhere that they exist. And the difference between the national parks in the north, which had a lot of intervention with roads and things, and national parks in the south was like a 15-fold increase in the standing biomass of those birds that would be, because of the hunting up in the northern national parks.
Stuart, going back to the Everglades and the Burmese pythons, is there any hope?
Well, for the Burmese pythons, there certainly is.
Yes. I mean, there's
know-
that woman who is now the great huntress.
Yeah, they have brought in some dogs, I think. They've done something with the Burmese government. I don't know what it was, but there are people who actually hunt those pythons over in Burma. And so I think they imported some some of them and started looking at ways to get around it, but it's rough and tumble out there. I mean, there's poisonous snakes that are not from this country or this hemisphere that are out there in the Everglades as well because of Hurricane Andrew. It just wiped out all these reptile breeding places and along the edge of the Everglades. So it's
So
you know, I
everything got loose
yeah.
because the pythons were pets, right?
Yeah, but some of them came from the same kind of, if they could market the skins would be worth, lots, but they don't do that because there's international trade on endangered species, CITES regulations on trading and, snake skins and stuff. And I'm sure they taste like chicken, so,
Of
you could
course.
get it.
Everything does.
What are the, you mentioned that there were non-indigenous venomous snakes. What are they?
Well, there are a few different types of cobras that are out there now.
You're kidding.
Yeah, and I don't remember exactly which ones, but they don't. Those guys don't really stand their ground. They kind of they want to get away from you more than
They
anything else.
slither off.
I don't think there are any black mambas out there. Don't give Benson any ideas.
That's a nasty snake.
Yeah, it is.
Stuart, I'm just wondering if does our Department of Agriculture ever get involved? It seems to me like there'd be a logical connection for them to get involved in some of these conservation efforts. Do they ever support your efforts, or how involved, if they are they with conservation efforts internationally?
So on the local scale in Illinois, the DNR, we have projects jointly with the DNR, and one of our veterinarians, I didn't talk much about our veterinarian team, but they're incredible. And we have a big bore CT scanner that we could fit almost anything short of a rhino into. But we also do a lot of work with some endangered turtles in the region, as well as some of the other species like Massasauga rattlesnakes. And DNR has been very good about this. They for a while they had a group that was saying, no, you can't you can't breed these turtles, for instance, in captivity because that's not natural, and the turtles don't know the difference. But and then release them into ponds, and so we were sort of an impasse for a while, but that's broken now and changed dramatically over the last few years. So in a positive way. On the international side, so in South Florida, we had hired a lot of scientists when I got there, and hydrologists, ecologists, research programs that had been ongoing since the mid-30s that Audubon had going on wading birds down in Florida Bay, and most of the Everglades National Park data on wading birds and a couple of other species came from Audubon data over the course of now it's almost 90 years, the past 90 years. But in that effort, what was really exciting to me was that there was a thing called the Ecosystem Restoration Working Group, which was all the agencies. So Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, EPA, the Corps of Engineers, the South Florida Water Management District, some of the water utilities. They all had to work together to come up with solutions to store water, clean it up, and flow it right. It sounds really simple, but it's incredibly complex. So,
Stuart,
yes.
the image disappeared.
Yeah, I need to plug in my phone here, as it turns out. Hang on. It's about to come back magically. Just plug me in and maybe it'll come back. Okay, here. Wait.
Almost.
I can hear you. Hang on one second. I have to go here again and there. Okay, I'm back.
Yay.
So
Yes.
so the Ecosystem Restoration Task Force was this incredibly collaborative group because they were tasked with finding resolution to the main issues of the Everglades. And they were run by two people who are, really the heroes of Everglades restoration, who made everybody work together. On the private sector side, there was a group called the Governor's Commission for a Sustainable South Florida. And we were coming up with all sorts of ideas and bouncing them off the Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District, and beginning to, at Audubon, and beginning to affect the votes of this body. And so the head of the commission called the governor and said, "You better put this guy Strahl on this commission so he has to vote with consensus with everybody." So I was on that, and then Jeb Bush's Governor's Commission for the Everglades and his Water Resources Advisory Commission. And it's a really complex problem with a really simple solution: clean up the water, flow it right, and ensure that we're not dumping too much polluted water out into the estuaries. So but yes, the USDA was involved. So the sugar industry was a big hurdle, and of course, they're basically mining the peat soil in the Everglades. It's gradually being depleted, oxidizing, being depleted, and the fellow who was actually became a friend, but he was also an antagonist. Next, alphabetically next to me, was a guy named Malcolm S. Bubba Wade from U.S. Sugar. And so, we would, and it's all about editing reports, editing the next stage of where we're going to be, and the conceptual, and then the plan that was a more detailed plan with all sorts of science in it. And so we would stack up like 5 or 6 editorial changes that we wanted to have before every substantive change we want to have. And we'd let Bubba win on all 5 editorials, and then we'd win on the substantive one, because everybody would say, "Oh, Bubba, come on, let him have one here. Come on." So we got 98.7% of what we wanted in that bill. And they didn't figure it out until the last meeting. And then the head of the Florida Department of Agriculture, the guy who was assigned to that, came up to me and said, "Stuart, you are a snake." I said, "What do you mean I'm a snake?" He said, "I've seen what you're doing. You're letting us win all the editorial ones, and you got the big one that you wanted. And how long have you been doing that?" And I said, "I have not been. I'm not sure what you're talking about."
Stuart.
And he became a really good friend after that, and a major donor to my birdathon every year. So anyway.
But Stuart, I'm fascinated with creating coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about enlightened self-interest. How do you get people to be enlightened along the lines that are effective?
Well, it was easy with the chambers of commerce. More money is if they're going to spend, $30 billion in the southern part of Florida, they're excited. They're all for it. The inner city populations we're looking at jobs, education. And I think I may have put in one of my things here, maybe I didn't, but I looked at, we did a survey among all these different constituencies that come to the zoo. And we asked them, if you had $100, if we gave you $100 to give back to us, what would you give it to? And the top line was, for most, was care and feeding the animals. next one was, and now talking about the Anglo non-Hispanics, next one was building new exhibits. Next one was usually, upgrading old facilities. One was, and then education, conservation, here or in the field, for education here in your community. And then of course, endowment, which was always the big money getter. Anyway, so what we found was that that African American populations, of when we diversified dramatically our guests by this time, African Americans wanted to see 42 cents on the dollar going to education equally in their communities and at the zoo. The Latino and Latinx community wanted to see, it was like, it wasn't 42, but it was like 37 or something like that percent in education in our communities and here at the zoo. And the other, which were mixed race, was, sort of, it tended towards that rather than Anglo. And so, and Anglos were care and feeding the animals, build new exhibits, do some other stuff, but, most of it was up on the top part of it. And so we redid our programs around those interests. And so now, Barbara, how much we're out in the communities and working, and how many kids are, we go to job fairs and get kids, and we work in inner-city libraries all over the region. And you can check out passes to the zoo. But it's a huge resource, and that educational piece is really critical. And so now we've grown our Conservation Scholars Program from 20 people from the western suburbs to 300 kids from just the high school, from mostly from under-resourced communities of color, and they're all going to college. It's really cool to watch and see some kids who, when I first met them, could barely, raise their head up, and talking about, I have so much pressure on me. I'm the first in my family to ever think about going to college. Everybody's saying, no, you got to stay home. And, she got a full ride to Notre Dame, and then she got a scholarship to Cornell Vet School. Nobody gets a scholarship to Cornell Vet School. It's remarkable to see where they're going to, because Yale, Harvard are on the list, and it's just 2 years of working with us on working with other people, public speaking, writing, PowerPoints, all those things, and they get to do fun things too. So I think the key to learning is having fun, because there's some things like inorganic chemistry. I did not have fun in organic chemistry, but organic chemistry made a lot of sense to me. It's the opposite for most people, but I think the more you make it fun, the more people learn. And what we've noticed, so in our multivariate analyses of what is success at the zoo, it starts with coming to the zoo and having a good time with your family, then seeing animals in what they perceive as a good welfare state, then seeing somebody talk about animals, and then hearing a keeper chat about animals. And then if you come upon a program animal that you can get really close to, the response is through the roof, because the response we want to see is, I've had the opportunity to learn something new. And when they've gone to that upper level, it just goes off the charts. And millennials are responding much higher than older or younger age groups. So hope to see that trend continue.
Shama?
I wanted to tell you a little funny thing that happened this week with Mara. So it's with your Benson, since you and Stuart know him. So we were doing this story on white stork, Stuart, because I'm a bunch of children, second, third, and fourth grade together.
Yeah.
And he suggested the white stork. So what we did, I did a story about migration, but I use your birds to teach them about culture. So the story is the birds fly from Zimbabwe to Morocco to Israel, so they learn about the cultures. And then because Mara had gone to Morocco a year or two ago, I had Mara zoom in and show pictures of Morocco. And because these big storks have these huge nests on top of Casbahs and mosques, they learned about us because of the birds. And then they learned about how you bargain in Morocco, because Mara was talking to them about bargaining. They learned all these things about birds and they loved it. And these are children in the South Side. But what I found, and Mara can tell how she interacted and what she thought of them. But what one part that I loved is a little child, she was a second grader, I think. The question that she asked, because we always leave space for them to interact. Her question was, which animals have died out in Africa? These kids, remember how she asked that question? She had asked me that previous week too. She remembered and she followed up. They care tremendously about this, not just because it's social justice and environmental justice. It's just simple caring. Mara, what did you have fun like chatting with them and showing them your pictures?
Yes, I did. Stuart, I'm the rodent. So I'm it was great fun. One of the other questions was, what was the scariest thing in Morocco? It's such strange questions. And what was the coolest thing? I mean, but the one about the animals dying out, I didn't really know the answer, but I hear from you today that it's giraffes.
Giraffes are going downhill because they're getting eaten. But you know, down in the southern part of the continent, you have people poisoning entire elephant families, and they do it with a compound that they put into melons that's called two-step, because they take 2 steps and they're dead. Very powerful stuff, and they're also killing off vultures as a result. But apparently vulture heads have some kind of shamanic use, and so they're able to sell those to shamans. In the north, the northern white rhino is, I think, all but gone, and over in the western part of the continent. And a lot of that is rhino horn, and a lot of the rhino horn stuff is very much tied to sort of mob stuff. Like I think Al-Shabaab is in Ethiopia is one of the big peddlers of rhino horn now. So yeah, it's kind of a mess, and I wish we could change the way some of the Far Eastern medicines were seen, because there's still a big trafficking in pangolin scales. So, you know, when you have 10 tons of pangolin scales, and each scale weighs about as much as a guitar pick, that's a lot of animals. It's very frustrating. But there are some very successful places, and I think this is one of the things that people need to understand. So where we went in Zimbabwe, Barbara and I and her cousin, they, after independence in Zimbabwe, there was just wanton slaughter of wildlife, and this group of ranchers and community-based groups went out and darted and captured lots of rhino and elephants and other things, and brought them into this huge protected area that has 99 signatories, all acting in concert to do conservation. And that's the sort of thing where, when you get the tribal elders together with ranchers, and where you have a good structure and you can have trackers out with the rhinos and things like that, there is hope. It's just getting there means having multiple different points of view at the table and saying, yeah, we're ready to go with that. So.
Stuart, are humans eating giraffe as well as animals?
Humans are eating the giraffes. Yeah, that's the main production or problem. You know, you've got in the north, and northeast, you've got all these refugee camps of Somalis and Eritreans and Ethiopians that have come over because of conflict. And I was talking to a fellow who worked on giraffes up in that area, and the last time he saw one of his giraffes was, she was surrounded by a whole, a couple of hundred people with clubs. Yeah, you don't like to think about that. I don't like to think about it either, but and there's some that are getting killed and brought into major cities to the market. They just butcher the meat and bring it in. Because if you chase a giraffe on horseback for a little while, they can run really fast, but not very far. And yeah, it's really sad. They're an amazing animal.
Penelope?
I remember one of the things that was sort of revolutionary about the Nature Conservancy was that in trying to protect land, they acknowledged the needs of the people who were on that land, whereas some of the earlier attempts had simply viewed the people as pawns, to move around. What you're describing of the giraffes sounds like there's hunger involved, and probably protein hunger, among other things. Just saying, and I'm not saying you're saying this, so forgive me if it sounds that way, just saying you shouldn't eat giraffes because they're wonderful animals is probably not going to.
It's not going to go very far, no.
Go very far. So what is an approach to if there are people there who are hungry, if there are people there who are starved for protein, which is the usual thing, who is trying to address that in the way of protecting giraffes?
So that's a really important and insightful question, because we're going to see more hunger and more drought, and food and water are going to be at a premium in a lot of these areas. So when I was working in Ecuador, one of the groups that was part of a big USAID project we had, Nature Conservancy was one, Wildlife Conservation Society was another, and CARE International was the chief of party. And the idea was sustainable use of biological resources. And so, that meant to USAID, it meant the only data you can gather is the data that says that biological resources are being used sustainably, which is not the scientific method. But having CARE involved was very important, because CARE is well known as a trustworthy organization in Latin America, and probably in Africa too. I think the next wave of conservation is going to be focused on humans in addition to wildlife, and is going to have a component that you're talking about making sure that there's enough food for the families that are there. And I think the change in the World Conservation Union, the big IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, that's happened over the past really 40 years has been about sustainability, means also sustainability of the food sources and natural resources for the human population as well. But that's a very good question, and I will call somebody I know at CARE pretty soon about that again. So,
Velma?
Stuart, it's in line with what Penelope asked. I think what I found always fascinating with the Nature Conservancy is their boards were filled with investment bankers, especially Goldman Sachs. No, it's true. I mean,
I know they have $1 billion. They have $1 billion campaigns every month, just about.
So what I find interesting, like long term, just the wording, biological resources. In the short term, I think it's really good to steward land, because I firmly believe climate is our world's financial officer. Without that, all resources are gone. But I find it somewhat disheartening in the big picture. If one views all biology as a resource, it's for us to be mined. There's a certain perspective that takes, I'm going to view the world as something to utilize. Do you know of people now, because you know so many people, as you develop future conservationists, those who don't take that fundamental view, here's a resource to be mined. Because I think technological people, all these AI people, all that mindset is, I will data mine everything. Everything is a data. There is no,
Yeah.
I want to use the word soul. They absolutely quantify and resource everything on the planet. That's not, to me, resourcing as much as utilizing. There's a subtle difference between the two.
Well, I think, let me put it this way. There's sort of lots of levels in between. So I was chair for a while, and probably will be again, of the Vital Ground Foundation, which is a land trust focused on grizzly bear conservation. And we do two things. We work in concert with just about anybody else who has an interest to create corridors for grizzlies that keep them out of the hair of people. And we also fund efforts towards having bear-aware communities. So you all may have heard about this woman who this happened about 10 miles from the cabin that's right behind me here. They were on a bunch of Californians on a bicycle trip, and they came up from Missoula, and they got to Ovando, which is this little cowboy town on the prairie, and they camped there, and they camped right behind the general store and museum. And a grizzly came into town, and first was after some chickens, and then they pepper sprayed it, and then it came stalking through the camp with all those people, and then couldn't find any other food, so came back and dragged a woman out of her tent and killed her, and was subsequently euthanized itself. That is one of those things that gets, the far right all irate about the grizzly killing a person, and I think the other side of it is, well, the grizzly has the right to be there, and so then the people don't, and it's like that is such a false dichotomy. You're going to have both people and grizzlies on the ground in a lot of these places. They walk by right behind my cabin. So you're data mining and all of that. There's some groups. We did this. We just brought at Vital Ground every grizzly bear biologist from Canada over to Washington State, over to North Dakota, and down into Wyoming and Idaho. And we got them all together, and we said, okay, so where are the places these grizzlies, what are they using the most? And then after we did that, then we could get the corridors, and everybody could vote for each other's corridor. And it was really cool to watch all these biologists. The people from Idaho said, hey, you're from the federal government. I can't talk to you. My boss says I can't talk to you. So, but all of a sudden they're talking, so I think those collaborative efforts, when they have a outcome, which is a consensus-based approach to a conservation issue, those things work really well. I was not the author of that one, but I was a eager participant. And then the second thing is, where are the grizzlies going to be in 10 years? Because we got to start right now with creating bear-aware communities in those areas. And so it's been a very interesting process because a lot of other people, felt that the most important thing is just to talk about bears, but not have a proactive plan. Have a if something comes up, we'll try and do it. And that's not how you attract funding to a grizzly bear conservation effort. So it's gotten widespread support, and also it's gotten widespread funding because people like those two components.
Stuart,
Yes.
the polar bears up at Churchill, I would assume, are bringing in a great many tourists.
Yes.
And then income.
Mhm.
Is that a good model? I mean, does it have potential?
It's a good model for polar bears because they all congregate right there, on the southern part of Hudson Bay and in the town of Churchill sometimes. So that's a good model there. And, there are other wildlife spectacles, like the ones down in Argentina. They're great models. They're pretty remote though. In Chile, they have the highest species density of flamingos nests in the high mountain salars or salt lakes of the Andes, and Chile has a monopoly on those. And so there's James's and Andean and not lesser, sorry. There are 4 species of flamingos up there. And we had a flamingo symposium up in San Antonio de Atacama, I think it was. Anyway, those are remarkable because you have a smoking volcano with flamingos flying across in front of it. It won't blow up. It's just going to smoke forever, I think. So there are, those congregations of wildlife. That was one of Bill Conway's.
But not for grizzlies. Grizzlies don't congregate.
Don't congregate.
No, they don't do that. They don't have the Scottish grizzly games and caber tossing. They beat the Scots, of course, but
Stuart, maybe I didn't ask my question correctly because I'm apt to do that.
Okay.
What I was asking is in terms of vision. So I'll give a clearer example, perhaps with India. So you have all these groups that want to promote energy conservation. They plunk a ton of money into areas in villages in India because they want to study. They give money in the hopes that once they talk about energy conservation, you give the money to somebody and a village that didn't have much, they will take some of the money and buy a machine and build something and develop commerce.
Yeah.
But if you play that out, the long-term idea is once they develop a commerce, it's a pathway for companies to sell stuff there. And then what was very low energy conservation over time will become a high energy use. It's an energy platform that's very cleverly marketed as human growth, helping each other. It's absolutely, in a very clear way, bad for the environment. So it's packaged very well as, it's very good for us, but in reality, it may not be. So I wanted to know, since you know so many people, in reality, who do you know? Who are you very encouraged with? Who's coming up? Who has a humane vision? Do you know what I'm asking? Like someone like Pete Buttigieg, when I see him, to me, he seems like a long-term visionary person. I care about vision because Merle told me you need to recognize people who have vision, which is different than strategy, because your vision will then determine strategy. Who is it that you feel, perhaps in the political arena or even in the business arena, because they all step in saying they're so green, but perhaps not green because Apple company says they're very green, they have a very green building, yet they pollute the world by not letting you upgrade a computer and wanting you to buy a new equipment every year. And
correct.
So who do you see is really, truly, anywhere in the world, who you find to be truly green, or at least practical green, not idealistic, but practical? Like I like your practicality. You sell bison hamburgers in the zoo while you're protecting bison. That's very fair.
Yeah. And the bison's coming from the porcupine tribe of
That's
Sioux.
right. So it's thought out. So who is that on a global or a national scale?
Well, there's a lot of smaller efforts, like the people who collect all the flip-flops that are washing up on the eastern shore of Africa and make everything from sculptures to who knows what with them, or the people who are gathering all the snares and now do snare sculptures in the form of giraffes and things. In terms of the way the conservation is seen in Congress, I'm having a little trouble with that. I haven't seen a major leader in that field in some time. And some of the names that come to mind, Barack Obama had an environmental platform. I remember when he started and he was getting all these people together, including me. I didn't meet him or anything. I just gave my 2 cents. But what happened as I'm not sure how that ended up being hitting the ground as major efforts. I know that Clinton his cabinet was really a very green cabinet, and they stuck with him on Everglades issues, on CalFed. Out of the Everglades will come eventually a series of ecosystem restoration projects that are being modeled right now at University of Miami in Florida, and those are really positive. But who has a good model? I think the good models always end up being who can work in a community that is not green, but has an issue that may be with wildlife. So Troy, Montana, is in the very western part of Montana. A big sign over it, the town the timber built, and it's not very progressive. So but the mayor called us at Vital Ground and said, look, I've got to get a hot wire around my sanitary dumpsters, because I can't have my hungover residents after a binge drinking of beer on Saturday night show up at the dumpster and dump it in and have a grizzly pop up out of the dumpster. So, but those are small things. That project was actually part of what they call a community. I'm not sure they're still doing it right now, but community forest project. And there were like 5 generations of people who had been living there, who showed up at the celebration of setting aside this very large area of timber and lakes. And but I think a lot of that happens on a scale that's not global. In Africa, African Wildlife Federation is building schools and is working with communities on clean water and that sort of thing. And I know that Barbara has put in several boreholes at a school that she's been working with Benson on. A lot of times it's the very little things that make a huge difference. For us in southern Venezuela, it was getting radios in. So that, if people had problems, they could call in a fast boat to come and get the person who was ailing or whatever. But, and the other part was motors. That's the other thing they really wanted, was motors. So those are the things that we were providing, plus education and other tools and medicines and all of that. I don't know if I'm answering your question very well.
I'm learning. It's not an easy answer, but this is great. Thank you.
It's so complicated.
Yeah.
You
I mean-
remind me of driving on I-90 into South Dakota. And on the left is a billboard saying, "Welcome to South Dakota. We love our animals. We love to hunt them. We love to fish for them. We love to eat them."
Yeah.
And right across the highway on the other side is another billboard for right to life.
Yeah, I went by those just about
Yes.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
in a
they're
Penske
still there.
truck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was at was back in the day, when we were first setting up my family farm as an education center. It was the year of the indigenous people. And so there was a little tribe of Indians, sort of mestizo Indians, that slaves that had gone off into the swamp and Indians that had gone off in the swamp, started back in the 1700s. And these guys invited over all the indigenous peoples who wanted to come to do a ground blessing of our property. And so I sat down with a shaman from the Sioux, and he said, "If you I hear you own this property." And, "Well, not anymore. It's been donated to this." And he said, "Yes, but you gave the land." "Yes, I did." So purified me with smoke and this and that, one thing, and then he said, oh, do you know what your spirit animal is? And I said, I have no idea what my spirit animal is. So he did some other things with me. And then he sort of looked at me and he said, you are the bison. You are Tatanka. And he looked at me with his eyes like this big. And I said, I am. And he said, yes. I've never known a white man to be a Tatanka before.
Wow.
So the later on, there was a effort back in the 1800s. New York Zoological Society, now Wildlife Conservation Society, was one of the movers and shakers in bringing bison back to the prairies. And a lot of private breeders had pure stock and all of that. And so they had a meeting out in Denver, and there were the environmental community, the bison ranchers, the bingos, the big international non-governmental organizations, and I can't remember who all else. And so they assigned us to these groups, and I was assigned to the environmental community. And I didn't, I don't have any problem with all those guys, but I knew most of them, and I knew we would end up at the same place we always end up. So I decided to go over with the ranchers and the hunting community. And so I went over there, and they were at first a little bit wary, and then we started talking more and more. We found common ground right away. I mean, it was like sustainable populations of bison is one thing. The other thing is, purity of the herds. That's another thing. The third thing was to not get in the way of commercial use, because there's so many bison meat is like half the fat and 60% of the cholesterol, and trying to develop a market for those things. And so we came back and gave our presentation, and somebody over in the bison rancher group started, well, I'm not sure about this. And so, well, what aren't you sure about? This went on for a while. And so after 2 days, we ended up having pretty much a consensus. But the American Bison Society is not an open society, so you can't just join. It's owned by Wildlife Conservation Society. And I'm not sure what the motivation of that group was to develop this, but I think it worked out okay, but it could be so much better. Like the American Prairie Foundation has linked up with, I think, 3 different tribes in north of the Missouri, in the high plains of Montana, and it's all done around the tribal initiatives as well. And so it's annoying some cattle ranchers that think it's, the UN is about to take over up there, but they do a good job at setting aside land. And if you put bison on degraded pasture, it will come back as a native prairie, which is really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Stuart, thank you as usual.
You're welcome. This has been more fun than I've had in months.
Good.
I hope it went both ways for you too. You all too. So anyway.
Well, in your retirement.
He's not retiring. He's retiring from, and he's retiring to. So
yeah, that's the thing. I'll be active. That little town where the woman was killed, there's a group there called the Blackfoot Challenge. And it's just a bunch of, sheep farmers, cattle ranchers, anglers, small and large landowners. It started out as weed control, but back in 2006 and 7, and then more so in 2008 and 9, they found out that Plum Creek Timber was going to start a realty company. So on their privately owned land, after they clear cut it, they would sell it for ranchettes. And so these guys got together and said, now, wait a minute. It was 2008. The market had just tanked. And Plum Creek is wondering if they've got a solid model or not. this group of people, maybe 25 people, went to the USDA and the Forest Service and said, look, you got this legacy project forest money. We can save like 500,000 acres of almost virgin timberland if you come on with us. So they got Nature Conservancy to buy the land from Plum Creek Timber, take off all the rights, all the development rights on them, and then had the USDA buy them from Nature Conservancy. And President Obama just got inaugurated at that point, and he said to Dan Ash, who was the head of the incoming head of the Wildlife Service and the head of the Forest Service and everybody else, you all get out there to that little town in Ovando and you figure out what these people are doing, because they did something really right, and we need to emulate that. And so I'll be working with them and Vital Ground and other people. It just, there's a lot of really good community-based stuff going on out there. And I'll come back and pester you, Barbara.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Take care of yourselves.
You
Bye
too. Ciao.
all.
You.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.